Okay, hello everyone. Today we will talk about virtual conferences and PC meeting. This is a topic that we have thoroughly discussed and debated in our community for a long time, but there were no virtual event, at least in our architecture community. But then this COVID-19 situation happened, and now we were living in this new normal life. So ASPLOS 2020, which was supposed to happen at Switzerland, it went all virtual in March. ISCA 2020 in the summer would be virtual. Micro 2020 PC meeting, that would be also again virtual. So today we will talk about this unprecedented situation, and we have two guests who are perfect to discuss this topic. Our first guest is Natalie Jerger. She's a professor at University of Toronto, and she's extremely well known for her technical contribution. But on top of that, she's also well known to be very passionate about many topics in our community, and she has done excellent work on many topics that are very close to even my heart. And she is the first person to actually write a blog at SIGARCH about arguing for virtual PC meetings. So that is why she's the perfect guest to talk about today's topic, virtual conferences and virtual PC meetings. Thank you, Natalie, for joining us.
Thank you.
So our second guest today is Boris Brot. He's a professor at University of Edinburgh and extremely well known for his data center research. Boris is an old friend of mine, and I know he's really passionate about so many topics that we agree and we argue with. And he's the first one to write a blog post at SIGARCH just after ASPLOS 2020 happened. And the position he made is virtual conferences may not be a long-term solution. And that is why he's the perfect guest today to discuss this topic with Natalie. Hello, Boris. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I will just start with asking you two that, like, you guys wrote these blog posts, so you made a public stand that based on some arguments, but also some personal stories should have motivated that you thought that you have to make a stand, and this is the time to talk about it. So I was just wondering that, like, can you give us some backstory that how you decided to write those blog posts and make your opinion known? So I guess I will start with Natalie here.
Sure. So my blog post, came out before the COVID-19 situation and the resulting shutdowns really hit North America. So that's it was not necessarily motivated by COVID-19, but rather by my experiences in the community over the last several years, and really about the efficiency of time. As I see everyone, my colleagues here at Toronto, my colleagues in the architecture community, everyone is getting busier and busier and busier. We seem to be taking on more and more things on our plate. And I go to PC meetings and maybe I have one or two papers to talk about. And so spending half a day getting to the PC meeting, spending a day and a half at the PC meeting, and then another half a day to get home, it doesn't seem like the most efficient use of my time to then contribute substantively to the discussion of just a couple of papers. I've seen program committee members never speak at a PC meeting because all their papers were decided beforehand, whether online accept or online reject. And so it really started me wondering, we're all so busy, is this the best use of our time, the best way to make decisions? I was also thinking about, climate change and the carbon footprint, but I knew that Ashish Cooley was going to talk about that in a separate blog post. So I really mostly focused on, better and more efficient ways to make the right decisions for papers. I want to say I really enjoy PC meetings. I have friends that I go see, and it's really great to connect with colleagues, and I would miss that, but I still don't think that it's necessarily the best use of my time. I also have a young child, and I prefer not to travel that much, and so I'm turning down a lot of PC meeting invitations in part because I don't think it's the right way to spend my time.
Boris, do you want to talk about your view?
Okay, so let me first say that while I really like the idea of in-person conferences, and so that's the position I will advocate today. I want to say that I fully support Natalie's position, and I think that the PC meetings, if they ever served a really important purpose, I think they've outlived it. Given today's number of submissions and everything else. So I'm afraid I won't be a particularly good debating partner on that particular topic. I'm in violent agreement with Natalie. But in terms of in-person conferences, yeah, so I think they're important. I reached this conclusion because I realized that conferences is something I really look forward to. I mean, of course, it's great if I have a paper there and I can present it, then that's really fantastic. But even if not, I value it not only as a way to get inspired research-wise, I think there are many ways of doing that, but I really value the interactions that happen there, right? And I've had fantastic ideas, bona fide collaborations, research, funding outcomes that all started out with super casual chats, somewhere in the hallway, at lunch, at dinner, over drinks, whatnot. Friendships. I mean, Samira, you and I, we've met, over many conferences, right? And that's how we became friends, right? And I think this is really important for community. I think that in some way, yes, science can be done just, by us being isolated. But the history of science shows that there's massive value in coming together and actually having this notion of a community and getting to know each other and these inspirations. And there's science that these collaborations actually prosper and foster and grow and yield, because of physical connections that we as humans form. And so I think that having physical get-togethers are absolutely imperative to the overall health and prosperity of our community. But I mean, having said that, I think this can also be decoupled from the reviewing model and PC meetings and things like that. And I think that's something that would be fun to discuss today.
So I guess we will discuss them in details, but I was particularly interested to know that like you wrote that blog post after ASPLOS happened, right? So was there any personal story there that you felt that this is the time to make this point? Like we will argue about pros and cons in depth, right? Like I was just wanted to know how did you decide to make that point?
Okay, I see what you're asking. Yeah, so I think two things happened. Number one, I think right around that time, and partly, inspired by Natalie's and Ashis's posts, kind of quite a few people were saying, well, what's the point of, in-person conferences in general? I think this happened, shortly after the pandemic started. And so a few other conferences were canceled. For example, DATE, that was supposed to happen right before ASPLOS was canceled. And so, it seemed to me like there was a growing chorus of voices that was saying, maybe we should really reconsider the entire conference model, not just the reviewing model. That really concerned me, to be honest. And also, as part of the ASPLOS organizing committee and kind of having watched the entire sort of ASPLOS pivot from the physical conference to the virtual conference and trying to help as much as possible, as part of SIGARG and the organizing committee with bring that online, and watching the whole thing, in person. We also had a paper there. So, I mean, I was really kind of committed to the entire event in every possible way. I honestly wasn't particularly satisfied with the experience. And I just want to say that, like, I think the organizers, Jim Laras, Karen Strauss and Luis Selze, I think they did a phenomenal job pivoting it on a dime at the last second based on need. So it wasn't a question of how well they did it. It was just it was just, I found it a suboptimal experience, right? Like the papers were fantastic, technical discussions online worked really well, but ultimately, you tune out and that's it. And in the middle of it, I was checking email and everything. I just didn't have the commitment, like kind of the presence and all of the wonderful other things that happen in a physical conference. I just found it a deeply suboptimal experience. And I really wanted to make sure that, there's a set of arguments, but, I was really actually happy that there's actually science behind some of these arguments that shows that physical conferences are really important.
Natalie, did you actually attend the ASPLOS conference?
Yeah.
What was your experience?
Yeah, so I just wanted to jump in and say, I think, I agree with Boris. I think that Jim, Luis, and Karen did a great job in pivoting on a very short notice. I want to, I hesitate to draw any strong conclusion. For me, ASPLOS happened in the first week of our shutdown. So I'm dealing with, having a toddler at home, trying to, fulfill all of my work obligations. And, it'd be tough to do work obligations and a conference at the same time. Like I agree with Boris that you'll be distracted by email and, people coming by to ask you things. But I think this was a really, suboptimal time in everyone's life to focus on anything besides, the fact that the whole world was on fire. So I signed up, I hope to maybe, jump in on the Slack a few times, but I just my schedule didn't permit any kind of participation given these extreme circumstances. My hope is we will be in a slightly better place for ISCA, in part because the semester is over and people will have a little more time, to devote to it. But I think that, pandemic plus virtual conference shouldn't lead us to conclude that virtual conferences don't work. I think we need more data points.
So what would be the expectation for ISCA, in June? I guess it's a question to both of you. For Boris, what type of events will make you think that it was not that bad and we could get the experience we were supposed to get even from a physical conference? And I guess for Natalie, maybe the question would be, is it enough? Do we see that this is how things should happen even in the future?
Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts on this. Number one, I think that despite my overwhelming feeling that physical conferences are important, that doesn't mean that they're absolutely perfect, at least the way we've been doing them, right? And so I think that this is a truly fantastic time to experiment, because we're out of necessity, we have to bring things online. And so I think we can experiment with online and figure out what works and see if there's a way we can rethink our in-person conferences in order to, again, optimize the experience, right? Our time is valuable. There's this whole carbon argument, financial argument, right? So we understand a little bit about, optimizing things, right? Making them more efficient. And I think this is really that opportunity. So just because I think that in-person conferences are great, that doesn't mean that they can't be better. And so I think what I would like, and so we experimented with ASPLOS, and I think there were some really interesting things that happened. And I think ISCA would be another opportunity, or should be another opportunity, to experiment and intentionally try some different things, different tools, different modes of interaction. So for example, ASPLOS, all of the talks were recorded, right? And so the conference was by design, they went for a fully asynchronous model, fully asynchronous, right? Maybe for ISCA would experiment with some, online things, live stream talks, or at least keynotes, and experiment, with the Q&A. Maybe we can have, a slightly better online poster session, right? So I think this is a great time to experiment because nobody really has the answers. And see what the lessons learned from that are, right? So I think one of the things I really liked in the wake of ASPLOS is that I realized that recorded talks actually work better than conference talks, right? I can do them on my own time. I can zone out. I can get a coffee, right? And then I can come back and pick up, and it's all there, right? And then there's incredible Q&A that there are a couple of threads, believe it or not, that are still going on today, right? Like from ASPLOS, technical threads, right? This is incredible. Like I think this is actually better than any real conference, right? So maybe there's a way we can do this decoupling of purely technical content, talks and paper presentations from other things at a conference. And so teasing out what works, what doesn't, what can we do better. I think this is a great time to just experiment.
I absolutely agree. And I think that it looks like ISCA's trying, a few different things that are different from what ASPLOS did. And we'll have, some live sessions and I think some live Q&A as well. And so I think there'll be some really, good opportunities to learn from this. And I think we'll see, other additional conferences that we can learn from. I just saw something on my Twitter feed yesterday about ICLR, and they had some sort of virtual hallway thing. Your avatar could kind of roam hallways, and as you got close to a group of people, you could kind of hear their conversation and join little mini Zooms or something. I don't know, so it sort of seemed weird to me, but it maybe seemed better than not having any hallway conversations or having any of those kind of casual interactions. So I think there's a lot of room to experiment here, and so I think this will be good. And I guess I'd also like to say that I don't think when this is all over and we go back to normal, whatever normal looks like, and we're all able to travel again, I'm sure many of us will be very thrilled to see people. But I think we should continue to take the lessons learned from virtual and understand that even in the best of times, not everyone can travel. Maybe it's financial, maybe it's childcare, maybe it's accessibility. Right now our conferences have always said, either you experience them in person or not at all. And I think that it would be nice if we had some sort of hybrid virtual physical saying, we want people all over the world to experience this in whatever platform is best for them. And if they can't travel, that doesn't mean that they're shut out from hearing keynotes or from, having some of these interactions. So I hope that, that would be one thing that I hope we learn from each of these conferences that is forced to go online, is how can we do better in the future.
Boris, any thoughts on that? Because like how to move forward, I think that's a discussion we should have when it's all over. Like what would be the alternatives? Like what things should be online and what are the things we should encourage in the physical conference to make sure that there are a large number of virtual attendees and they can also experience the conference.
Yeah, so I think, again, drawing on some of the reading I did in preparation for the blog post, and I cited the sources I used. I feel like kind of my personal experience of, man, that's the serendipity that is like super awesome, right? And that's like what leads to like these super amazing outcomes often. That kind of generally seems to be the consensus, right? And so there's real research that shows that getting away from very fixed technical programs, lots of kind of slotted talks, one after another, and you have like 3 minutes for questions, next talk, we as people get overloaded very, very easily, tune out, right? That it's actually better to have less structured, very technical time and, facilitate less structured, but of course still somehow directed interactions, right? And so I think I would really like us to try and somehow structure physical conferences to maximize exactly that, because that seems to be the experience that's very difficult to do online, right? How do you get a bunch of people in a virtual room with today's technology with a very broad sort of notion, hey, let's discuss, analog computing, right? Or whatnot, right? How do you drive something like that online? I really don't think we understand that, but I think there's enough understanding how to do this in person, right? We know how to do this in an in-person setting, right? We can use visual aids, we can use, flip charts, whiteboards, blackboards, breakout groups, right? All of that stuff. I think it's not an impossibility in the future, but we don't know how to do this online, but we know how to do this in person. So I think I'd really like us to think about restructuring physical conferences to maximize impact, which is not something we've ever thought about, ever, right? It was just, here's a conference, present papers, have some food and coffee, go home, right? But I think if we can think about maximizing impact and what that means and how to do that, I think amazing things could happen. And so one particular example that I have that I think is really fantastic is something called the ASPLOS Dachstuhl. I don't know if you guys personally are familiar with that. Maybe some of the evangelists of this podcast may not be. So Dachstuhl is kind of funded by the German government. It's organized in Germany. It's a physical place. It's actually a village in the middle of nowhere, right, by design. So it's like you really cannot go anywhere once you get there. And so the idea is, somebody proposes a topic. So like, I've been to one on rack scale computing, and and then you show up, and it's kind of like, you get there and then you hash out an agenda. There's no hard preconceived agenda, right? So, you literally whiteboard a bunch of ideas. There are definitely opportunities to present your research, but kind of like in scope of where it fits. Every single Dachstuhl is a little bit different because, again, there's no very hard format that's followed. People dynamically form work groups, and then at the end, it all comes together, and then the organizers write a report, right? And so there's a massive degree of dynamism, massive degree. There's a great deal of just free talking. And it all takes place over multiple days. There are 3 days and 5 days, and then I think maybe even 7 days Dachstuhls, right? Wow, it's insanely intellectually stimulating. Like, it's super, super cool. It never gets boring because at no point are you just listening for hours and hours of talks, right? I'm not saying this is exactly like the precise format that our conferences should follow, but I think it's a very vivid example of a model that clearly works incredibly, incredibly well, right? And so, yeah, so like I said earlier, I just think that this is a great time to rethink how we do things, and what goes online and what we do in person. I agree with Natalie. I think no matter what, we should always try to have some online presence for people who cannot attend.
Yeah, so I think, when Boris talking about the Dachstuhl and things like events like that, I mean, that was also part of what kind of motivated me on the virtual PC meeting. If I'm going to say, because of my time constraints or my carbon footprint, that I'm going to take, 4 or 6 professional trips per year, I would rather those trips be to workshops where we have, brainstorming, breakout groups, discussions, than it would be to a PC meeting, frankly. So, for me, it was sort of like, if I'm going to limit the number of trips, is a physical PC meeting how I want to spend my time? So, I think that's it. I think it's important to think about, maybe we're going to all do a little bit less travel after this. Who knows what's going to happen, but how do we maximize those interactions? I used to go to 3 or 4 major conferences per year. I hit up all of HPCA, Micro, ISCA, ASPLOS, and, I think we could have maybe fewer conferences and more meaningful interactions in those conferences. We're seeing the same people. We're seeing, the talk format is not necessarily the best way to stimulate discussion. So I think we do need to sort of overhaul how we approach all of this in the future.
I feel like we are kind of converging to this notion that we should decouple what's the purpose of the conference. So one main purpose is the talks. Like, students go there, they present their technical talk, they get feedback, and that we are converging that might be possible to make it online or a mix of online plus some physical question and answer session. But then there is this huge component of interaction and talking about new topics or debating about old topics, like that dynamic discussion that just happens on the hallways, like how to structure it better so that everyone can get something out of it. So I will completely agree that most probably this is the time we should rethink this. But one thing I would like to ask is, like, when we are talking about conferences, we are kind of thinking from our perspective, like from the students' perspective. Like, what is your, what do you think, like from students' perspective, they can maximize attending a conference, and how virtual versus physical impacts that?
Yeah, so I mean, I see two kind of sides. On one hand, virtual, I think, opens up a lot more student participation. I think sometimes, students, advisors only fund students if they have a paper, or students are limited in the number of, funded trips they can take over the course of their PhD. So, virtual gives them the option to learn a lot more and see a lot more. The flip side is, the networking side, and particularly as you're getting close to the end of your PhD, you want to, you want people on hiring committees to know who you are and to recognize you and your work. And, for me, if I meet someone and I shake their hand and then later their, CV comes across my desk, I'm more likely to make that connection. If I chatted with them online, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that connection would be as strong, and I would have, I remember this person, I remember their talk or their elevator pitch. So I see there's some benefits for students. It gets more of them to participate, but I wonder if the networking will be, more challenging, and it will make things more challenging, thinking about the job market. If you're not already, you, me, and Boris, we're all deeply embedded in this community. We know a lot of people. We can network outside of conferences as well. If you're brand new to the community, I think it's a lot more difficult to kind of break in a virtual setting. So I'm not sure how to fix that.
Yeah, I completely agree with Natalie. I think that ultimately we somehow need to look at this as an opportunity, again, a way of maximizing impact all around in every possible way. And this obviously includes opportunities and participation by students. I think it's an interesting question whether the virtual experience makes it easier or more difficult. On the one hand, it's like everybody is kind of equal, right? I mean, yes, I know that name, but it's all virtual. And so there's this degree of disassociation, right, from the real world. And I think that makes things easier. But at the same time, it's exactly as you said, Natalie. I mean, yeah, it's a name on a screen, right? And if you've never met that person before, what kind of impact does this casual interaction on Slack or whatever leave? It may not be as deep or as lasting. So yeah, I think ultimately, we just simply need to try and maximize opportunities. Yeah, I mean, again, kind of doing the reading I did to write my blog post, kind of the research, what people have learned in the past about trying to maximize impact of both physical and online conferences. Again, trying to somehow organize things to maximize interaction seems to be a really big deal. And I think we have some things that are aimed at that, right? We have the meals, we have the social outings, the banquet, just the coffee breaks themselves. But I don't think we really kind of aim for that as a goal. And that seems to be something to really try to aim for, right? Because again, technical sessions, they're not great for interaction, right? I mean, it's just a lot of time of sitting and having one-way delivery of information. So poster sessions, I think, are fantastic. Maybe that's one thing we can do. I think recently there's been a trend toward mentoring students, right? So with these mentorship opportunities, I think that's fantastic. We should do more of that. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe somehow having more strategic seating arrangements at meals in physical conferences, right? Where like actually tables are organized ahead of time. And so you have like 3 professors and 7 students, right, at a table. I think that would be cool because there's definitely a lot of bunching that goes on, right? And so I don't know, again, like, I just feel like there's so many amazing things we can try. And normally when there's this like inertia, it's really hard to break out of that. But like, this is the perfect time to rethink it all.
Yeah, I completely agree. But one thing I would like to point out that like publishing a paper in a top conference, it's a big deal for the students, right? They work really hard and to see that this is a reward to that hard work, they go somewhere and they are the stars of those technical sessions, right? Like it's very rewarding experience. So I feel that just having some YouTube talks, like it's not just the same, even though actually by having YouTube talks, they reach a large audience compared to a conference. So there are pros and cons. So do you think this is like something that we should just shift our mindset, or there is some fundamental way to actually rethink it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a good point. I mean, I remember giving my first ISCA presentation, and you're nervous, but then it goes well, and everybody claps, and you get all these questions, and you get this instant feedback. Like, you can see, are people in the audience leaning into you? Are they engaged? And you're like, oh, people are excited about my work, or this is there's good follow-up discussions that happen. And yeah, when that's on YouTube, nobody claps for you. I mean, you don't have that same sense of, I did this. And I mean, I know that, my student who has an ISCA paper this year, I mean, he's super excited and he's thrilled the paper is published, and he hasn't, expressed any disappointment about not being able to actually, present it live to people. But I think that, there is something to be said for that. And for that, it's, the PhD is grueling, and this is like going and presenting live as a reward, and students should be celebrated. And I do worry that we'll lose some of that, and I don't have a good answer for how to fix that part.
I think that again, like maybe we can just we don't need to like change everything and completely eliminate talks, right? Maybe we can just do things a little bit better. So right now, if our typical talk slot is, let's say 20-25 minutes, with a couple minutes for questions and 18 minutes for the talk itself. I mean, why not use the same exact amount of time and, let's say, compress the talk to just 5 minutes, right? So it's extremely short and digestible by absolutely everybody, deep, like completely no results. Here's the main idea, here's the problem, here is the idea, right? And then, a few minutes for questions, and then the remainder of the time in the session, have a panel where it's only the presenters and the limelight is on them. And then you just open the questions to an audience. Presumably the talks have been grouped into a session because there's a theme, right? And it's a complete free-for-all, and it's this crazy time for like crazy questions and cross-cutting questions, across the papers, right? And I think there's super, super cool things we can do where we actually do things better without any detriment to students.
Yeah, so I just want a second. Shorter talks would be amazing. I think there's 20 minutes. I mean, we've mostly, I think, gone, there were 30 in the beginning, I think, then 25. I think we're mostly at 20, but yeah, I think we could go to 5 or 10, and we would not, it would force students to be, to think more about their work and how best to convey, the key insight. That's what I care about. I don't care about, bar charts with, 30 bars that I can't read in the 30 seconds that it's up on the screen. I care about the insight and what was learned. So I think we can have shorter talks and better talks. So I agree.
Yeah, it seems like a good compromise. Yeah, so I guess ISCA is trying that format, that there would be some pre-recorded talks and there would be like lightning talks with question and answer. What Boris said, like having the panel and let the students discuss, that also seems like very interesting thing to try.
So there was something kind of like that. ISCA, when it was in Austin, I don't know if either of you were there. This was like 2009, I think. I remember, not for every session, but for a couple sessions, like I remember the PCM, phase change memory session. There were 3 papers, and I think they were, targeting very similar problems, sort of similar things. And so they deferred all questions and had like a mini author panel at the end for 15 or 20 minutes. I think, my impression was that it was not hugely successful, but I also think, as a student, that could maybe be very intimidating and you need more prep. And it's sort of there might be some awkward phases before we get to the thing that works, and people just need to get used to a new format. But I don't remember seeing it after that one time at ISCA. So I don't know what to conclude from that.
Oh, sorry. By the way, I'm not like advocating this as like the model, right?
No, I know.
I was totally just like going ad lib here. All I was simply saying is I don't think that, we necessarily have to disadvantage students as we improve our conference experience. That's all.
Okay, so One thing I would like to touch on about the virtual PC meetings, that it feels like you two are kind of both in agreement. But do you want to tell the audience that why you both are in agreement for virtual PC meetings? And I guess we will have micro this year, and I guess we will have some sort of results that how it went after that.
Go ahead, Natalie, it's your baby.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, the PC meetings that I've done over the, 11 or 12 years that I've been a professor, they've all been largely the same, 50 plus people now, 60, 70 large groups. I hear, the generation before ours talk about, the PC meetings when, there were 20 or 30 people, when they were smaller groups and the discussion was more engaging. I've never seen it work that way. It's sort of always kind of worked the same way, with the main shift being towards more and more online accepts. I mean, I will say over the last, 11 years, I say less and less because more of my papers are being decided, beforehand. So I think that that's, the main reason. I think so. The physical meeting scales. I mean, one way to scale it is time. Having a day and a half, 2 full days, the longer these things go, the more exhausted everyone is. And I don't know that we're making the best decisions. I don't say this to disparage anyone's accepted papers. I think the programs we've had over the last several years are all fantastic, but, I don't know that this is the best way to render a decision on papers. And I think it's time to think about, can we come to, even better decisions that are maybe more fair, more uniform. We have, VJ from Purdue, who's always talking about, a fair and consistent standard, and how do we achieve that? And it's just not clear to me that a full physical PC meeting is achieving, the best outcome. So I think we need to experiment with other options.
Yeah, I'm in absolute agreement with Natalie. Sorry, I think this could be a very boring part of a discussion. In my experience as well, I'm very frustrated by the fact that lots of people have to travel from all over the world, right? Often, I mean, pretty much always the meetings are in the US. For some of us in Europe, these are pretty long trips. I feel particularly bad for our colleagues in Asia who have to, they're spending a lot more time on planes than in the actual room, right? I mean, it's quite awful if you really think about this. And then, in many cases, these people get to speak like twice, or so. Order of, very small single-digit number, right? This has extremely questionable benefit. I've had a few experiences, I'm sure you guys both have as well, very frustrating ones where, somebody who did not review the paper, and maybe or maybe not, has or has not kept up, with the latest work in the field, all of a sudden sort of takes over and starts expressing, opinions without actually having reviewed the paper and knowing the content. I mean, there are lots of other things, again, like we've all seen where it seems like there are ways to kind of hijack the process and people to opinions that are not informed by their review of the paper, but like the actual content of the paper. And so at best, it simply sidetracks the discussions, and at worst, it actually influences the actual paper outcome. So I find that very, very disturbing. So it's like the whole travel aspect, accommodating everybody in the big room. This is a big problem with growing PCs, right? 60, 80 people. No more submissions, bigger PC. How do you accommodate all of this? Carbon, all of the bias in the decision-making. I think we can do better than that. Yeah, I think we can do better than that. And I think, again, as Natalie said, I think this is the right time to rethink all of this. Because I think that, while still following the existing reviewing process where we have PC chairs, we have some number of reviewers, one or more rounds, right? I think we can actually reach better decisions by removing this constraint of having an in-person PC meeting. I think it's an opportunity.
So let me actually play the devil's advocate then. So I agree with the travel part, like just by organizing online PC meetings, we can eliminate the travel. But I think I will not agree that it will eliminate the other part. Like even if it's an online meeting, someone can disrupt your discussion and someone can provide opinion even without reading the paper. So online, I don't think that solves that problem. But the main argument I will make is, again, like serving in PC committees, a lot of work. Like it's a hard work, like around 20 papers. It's not that easy. And personally, I feel that like going to the meeting and interacting with other people, like that's, again, it's a reward of the hard work I have put. And if these conferences or the PC meetings, they're all online, most probably I will accept way less invitations. So I guess, again, the question would be that, like, for the PC meetings, there is this part which is go through the papers, but there is also this part of discussion and interaction. So how do you see these two things weighing each other?
Yeah, so I mean, I enjoy, you know, the discussions and interactions at the PC meeting when you're out in the hallway with conflicts and you're chatting with all your other conflicts, and or you're at the dinner. You know, I think there are, you know, I enjoy that as well. I think going back to our earlier discussion, I think we can do that with, you know, other types of meetings that are more effective, that I think will still be able to be, you know, a connected community that interacts. And I do agree. I mean, it's sort of the reward, but I guess, you know, you should say no to more PCs anyway, regardless. You know, I just, you know, I was told by someone a couple of years ago that I should be doing that he was doing one major PC per year, and therefore I should also do one major PC per year. And after that, I started really limiting myself, partly to manage my own workload, but also partly to, you know, spread the workload around and to make sure that lots of people are being invited to participate in this process. I think that with an online approach, we could have potentially much larger PCs, so the workload per PC member goes down and more people are become integrated into the decision-making in our community, that the sort of physical scalability of the room and how you arrange the tables and being able to hear everyone does put limits on the size, that, you know, we have trouble getting beyond, you know, 70 or 80. So I think that we could have larger PCs, which would help in terms of spreading the workload around as well.
I think that I first want to make a point, which is that I agree with Samira that kind of in a way, yeah, you do all of this, you know, very difficult reviewing work, difficult and painful in a way. And it's almost like, yes, traveling to a well-organized PC meeting, hopefully in a nice location, it's actually a little bit of something to look forward to. It's a bit much of pain to travel, right? But like, yeah, you get together with these people and these are the best people in the field, right? And so it's very exciting. And so it's a networking opportunity. But I think there's actually the other side to this, which is not often mentioned, in that, as we know, but we know that actually, you know, these reviewing communities, they're kind of like good old boys clubs, right? And for many people, like you're either in or you're in, right? Like there's a certain set of people that is often invited, and there are other researchers who are really good in every measurable way. You know, maybe they're like at like somewhat less prestigious institutions, but they don't get invited as often, right? And so, you know, because this is by invitation only, I think this is kind of a bad downside, right? Like this networking opportunities are all of a sudden reserved for like these people who are in this club, you know, who get these invitations. And so in a way, I actually think eliminating in-person PC meetings, having much bigger PCs, spreading the load, it equalizes the field. Yeah, it takes away this nice little carrot, but it's actually better. I think that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, so I completely agree. I mean, I think that there is this, you know, sense that, you know, once you start getting invited to PCs and you're part of this club, you know, you get invited to more PCs, and it's challenging to look beyond the people that you know well and try and find new people to bring in. You know, with someone you've never interacted with before, will they do a good job? Will they be reliable? And so I think that if we could, you know, get bigger PCs, get more people involved, I think it would help. Yeah, it would level the playing field. And certainly, sometimes in online discussions, I'll come across a reviewer who I don't know, who I have met, what they're working on, and get to know them a little better so I can, I can know people and have some, level of networking, even with an online, PC meeting. That would be good. And I think just, reducing the workload of every PC member is going to be, imperative.
Yeah, I completely agree. Also, I just want to say that, I mean, maybe, yeah, I mean, it's like you give me a soapbox, I'm going to climb the soapbox. But no, but maybe, I mean, maybe in the longer term, and I understand this is a super loaded issue in the community, and I'm not trying to steer the discussion this way, but I mean, ultimately, maybe in the longer term, we can even think about better reviewing models that make the entire, large scale PC discussion not, very necessary, right? I mean, ultimately, if the right way to do things is to reach the consensus across, among reviewers, then this notion of PC is just a notion. It's a bunch of reviewers, but every paper is decided individually by the reviewers who saw it, right? So whether the meeting is online or not, it's not clear if the entire PC needs to participate in a discussion, right? And then if we agree that the right way to do things is to only have this decision among reviewers, I mean, again, maybe kind of rolling deadlines and a more journal-like model, right, is the right way to scale absolutely everything. And I think scalability is a big problem in this process.
Yeah, I mean, I think Boris and I are very much in agreement about all of this. I don't know that, I mean, I know some people feel super strongly about a full PC discussion and engagement. I see more derailing happening than I see value add. I mean, sometimes someone will speak up and ask a very good question that does, move the discussion forward. And sometimes it's just, I think it just derails things, and the vote ends up being, somewhat random sometimes. People are just kind of, and they're looking, well, now we're voting online, but, if you stick your hand in the air, you're kind of looking around, wondering, how everybody is voting, and you could be swayed by influential people in the room. And so I think that the reviewers are the ones who should decide. Maybe you can argue that we need more reviewers per paper to make a good decision, which doesn't help with the scalability argument. I think certainly Moyen has advocated that there's, more reviewers per paper helps. I think I was reading through the comments on the various blog posts, and I think it might have been Christos who commented on one and said, well, we could all write shorter papers, that 11 pages is arbitrary. Load would go down if papers were shorter, and then maybe you could read more papers. There's more context switching then with more papers, but still, I think that we could find, new ways to make, better decisions that don't involve 50 people who have never read the paper, or who read the paper 3 revisions ago and have not changed their opinion, even though the paper itself has changed dramatically. So, a journal style model, the same reviewers reviewing the paper again. I think there are a lot of ways we can do better here.
Also, in adjacent communities, like in systems, for example, they often have more than 2 rounds of reviewing, right? And so one way to spread the load is to do what we already do, 2 rounds, but have even more rounds, right? And so the only papers that advance to the next round are the one where, the current set of reviewers is happy to have them advance. And also in terms of the time frame, one of the nice things about conferences as opposed to journals is the time frame is limited. Well, right now in today's world with physical conferences, right, there's quite a bit of prep that has to go into this massive meeting, right? And so typically kind of, willingly or unwillingly, discussions tend to freeze a bit before the actual meeting, right? So even with the existing time frame, by eliminating the entire in-person meeting and restricting the discussion to reviewers, you could actually buy more time, for additional rounds of reviewing or getting that very late expert review, right? Because it's not 24 hours to get that review; it's like a week or 2, right? So. Yeah, I don't know. And also, I mean, again, I feel that we really need to broaden our pool of reviewers in terms of increasing expertise as the field grows. And again, getting rid of these sort of limitations that we've imposed on ourselves, right, including in-person meetings and kind of, fixed review timeframes and everything, will actually improve everything. Hopefully reduce bias and outcomes for sure.
Yeah, I guess let's see how the micro PC works. But I guess just 2 days ago, I was on a online PC for hot storage, and it's not that big as our community. I think there were maybe 30 reviewers, and like, I don't know if the organizers, the chairs, they decided beforehand, or it just happened. What happened is, even like, they divided the whole day into sessions, and a set of reviewers would be online on those sessions. So even though the whole thing went on for maybe 10, 12 hours, like, I only had to be present for a couple of hours. And the participation was actually amazing. Like, it was a very junior heavy PC, but like, there were people were discussing a lot during the meeting. Like, in the hot CRP, during the discussion, there would be like many messages, like people are discussing at the background, then doing live discussion. So I felt actually that the discussion goes better online compared to the physical PC meeting.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think it's great you had that experience, and I think we'll, micro, hopefully the, program committee chairs will, share their thoughts afterward about what they learned and what worked well and what didn't work well. I think the only way a virtual PC meeting works is if it is divided up into chunks. I can't imagine sitting on a 10-hour Zoom with my 60 favorite architects. I mean, by the end of that, everyone's going to be totally burned out. So I think it has to be in some sort of, divided up format, and then everybody will be sharper and paying a bit more attention, hopefully, and more engaged is, one way to do it. Or just to do it fully, asynchronous, through hot CRP and, discussions. I think we could resolve more papers than we do. Sometimes, I think for ISCA, I was hesitant to resolve a paper because it's like, if I resolve this paper, I won't have anything to say at the meeting. I need to have at least one paper to discuss in San Diego. And so, but if we don't have that meeting, then we'll be forced to do more resolution. And the more people hate, long Zoom calls, the more they'll be inclined to resolve the papers through online discussion, I think.
Boris, do you want to add something at the end?
No, okay. I really agree.
So I guess we are kind of at the end, and usually at the end, I ask these almost random questions and ask people's opinion. Today, the first question that I will ask is, so we are at this lockdown for a while. So do you think there is one thing that you really miss, or once the lockdown is over, there is one particular thing you're really looking forward to do? Like, is there anything like that?
Go ahead, Natalie.
It's tough to narrow it down to one thing. I think I miss all the things. I miss my colleagues. I miss, interacting with my students, in my office in a sort of, quote unquote normal way. I miss dropping my daughter off at school every day. And I miss all the normal.
Yeah, I think for me, to be honest, it's quite a bit of it is work related, same as Natalie said. We have a really fantastic department, and it's extremely friendly and very sociable. So we have communal coffee and all of these things. And so it's exactly like I was saying about the conference. This is like all of the super cool serendipitous stuff that just naturally happens. And it's such a great vibe. And I really, really miss that, kind of like, being home and working from home. It's serendipity, to be very, very honest. It's very energizing and it's very fun. And so it's hard to be as energized working from home, but it is more productive, I will say.
So I also definitely miss all those things. But on top of that, I think I had like an existential crisis. I was like, life is short. Like once this lockdown is over, I need to buy a sports car. So what looks like you don't have things like that. So the other question I will ask is, like nowadays, a lot of people are organizing these happy hours in Zoom. So like for socializing or just drinking, like what's your experience with the Zoom social hour?
So I don't have a lot of experience with it. I've been fairly limited in the amount of time that I can devote to being online. And frankly, I find this style of interacting to be much more draining. So I think it's, it's part of it's because, we're also sort of grieving that loss of normalcy, that idea that I would be going and having a beer after work with people in an actual bar and, they would be sitting across from me. I think part of it's the lack of normalcy. Part of it's the, I can no longer compartmentalize home versus work. It's all, blurry. I think, people need to continue to connect any way that keeps them, sort of mentally well and, finding the right strategies that work for them. I mean, this was a really enjoyable experience chatting with the two of you, but I have a faculty meeting at noon that's going to be, maybe a little more draining. So, I think it's tough to make time for all of the Zooms that I may be invited to.
So we had our very first virtual group meeting, literally yesterday. So I think we've all, as like my research group, we've done a job maintaining meetings and kind of we all, chat on Slack and whatnot, share a lot of things. But when I did the first one in person yesterday, it was really motivated by the fact that my very first PhD student defended, so that was cool. We have a new student joining the group. And so it's like, okay, let's do it. But like once we did it, I was a bit hesitant. I mean, it's a biggish group and, this virtual happy hour, but it was so fantastic. I just joked, no serious talk, no research stuff, It was fantastic. It was actually, I don't know, I felt really good afterward. I have to say, like really good. I was like, yes, okay, there's this group and like, yeah, everybody's doing well. We'll definitely do more of those and actually regretted not doing them before. So I think it can work, but yeah, I completely agree with Natalie. I mean, it's still not the same, and when it's technical and not this fun stuff, then it's really draining.
Okay, last question. So Micro 2020, it's supposed to be in Greece, and do you think we will actually have a physical conference?
I don't believe so, no. And this is purely my own opinion. This has nothing related to my position on the steering committee or anything. I just don't think the world will be fully reopened by then.
Unfortunately, I agree with Natalie. Unfortunately, I agree. I'm on the organizing committee of Micro, and I mean, right now we're proceeding like everything is going to be okay. And I really hope it's going to be okay, but unfortunately, I don't believe it will be, but let's hope for the best.
Yeah, so I really want it to happen, but yeah, I don't have that much hope. It feels like we may not be able to actually have a physical conference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it will defeat the purpose of having an in-person gathering if we have to socially distance. Going back to the very first point.
Yeah, I guess then we have to come up with some other way to socializing. Yeah, I guess we can have the whole discussion again. Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Like this was really fun and I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the interaction too. Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
That was really fun. Thank you, Samira, very much for organizing this. This was fantastic. Natalie, thank you very much. It was fun to chat.
Yeah, it was nice to see both of you.
All right, take care, guys.